Welcome, everybody. My name is Michala Bednarikova. I am Vice President of FEPSAC, European Federation of Sport Psychology, that is organizing this webinar. And I would like to, first of all, give a warmly thank you to our guest today, who is Mark Andersen. I will talk and introduce him a little bit in a few minutes. But before we start, a few practical guidelines for our today's webinar. So first, I will introduce Mark, and then we have the interview with him. I named it 4 times W plus H, which means we will answer the what, when, why, and how, and who. That's for the W and H. And then we will have about 10-15 minutes for your questions. Talking about your questions, on the panel below your name, you see the icon of Q&A. So there you can type your question. The chat icon is disabled, so anything you want to share with us, please write it to the Q&A. As I mentioned, we will have a section of Q&A at the end. However, after each subsection, meaning after answering each question regarding the supervision, I am going to also take a look into the questions you raised on the go. So please write them as they rise up in your head so we can answer them on the go if it is connected with the sub-question I'm raising. And now, please let me introduce Mark. Actually, I believe that if not all of you, then definitely most of you know Mark Andersen, at least if not in person, then for sure through his book, Doing Sport Psychology, because I believe this is kind of a Bible for applied sport psychologists. Beside that, Mark mostly retired from academia, mostly means that he's still a professor of psychology at School of Health and Welfare at Halmstad University and in Sweden. And as well, he works at the Institute for Social Neuroscience in Melbourne, Australia, where he supervises Master and Doctor of Sport Psychology programs in sport, exercise, and clinical psychology. His present areas of interest and practice include psychology of injury and rehabilitation, the training and supervision of graduate students and professionals, interpersonal mindfulness, Buddhist psychology, psychodynamic issues in sport psychology service, and neuroscience and application in psychotherapy. His most recent books are Being Mindful in Sport and Exercise Psychology, published in 2017. Then in 2017, he also published with colleagues the Athlete Apperception Technique, Manual and Materials for Sport and Clinical Psychologists. I think this was published after a lot of years of development. And finally, the book I have already mentioned, Doing Sport Psychology, had its 21st anniversary edition, published with original authors' reflections. I can strongly recommend this, and it's an ebook. The original Doing Sport Psychology is, I think, out of sale for quite some years, and this is the way how you can reach it. So. Welcome, Mark, and a warm thank you for coming. The picture on the screen is actually one very old one. So now you can reflect maybe also on the picture a little bit.
That's living at the beach in California in the 70s. But thank you very much for inviting me. And greetings from way down under. I live in Tasmania, which is about as far south as you can go in Australia. I mean, the next stop is Antarctica. And we're all quite sad here in Australia today because our entry into Eurovision got kicked out of the festival last night, and so we're in mourning for our Eurovision flop this year.
So Eurovision being part of the Australia being part of the Eurovision.
Australia's been part of the Eurovision for the last 6-7 years, and a lot of because of all the Europeans who migrated here, especially after World War II, Eurovision is very big in Australia.
All right. Let's come to the topic of our today's discussion. I invited you to talk about the supervision in applied sports psychology. So I would like to start with raising the first question. Can you offer us some definition of supervision?
Well, I think for the most concise definition of supervision I can think of is very short, and I would say it's assisted self-reflection. And one of the main things we're trying to do in supervision is help the supervisee reflect on things like what they know, what they think they know, and what they don't know, and also reflect on their practice. And the supervision's main goal, besides helping the supervisee become a better psychologist, sports psychologist, counselor, psychotherapist, is the first one is the protection of the public who use such services. Supervision is a safeguarding type of activity that so that the people who are out there working in the psychological and other helping professions are practicing ethically and competently, and that the public is protected from maybe incompetent or unscrupulous practitioners. That would be the first main goal of supervision. And then, of course, it's the growth and development of the practitioner. And so supervision, I kind of like to think of supervision in terms of when you think about the medieval guild system in Europe, where you had the apprentice, journeyman, and the masters. And sort of the supervision process has similarities to that. The apprentice is coming to learn a craft, often supervised, sometimes by a master, but often supervised by journeyman. And the journeyman is the one who goes out and can act independently, whereas apprentice needs lots of supervision. But for the journeyman to become a master, then a lot more education and training happens for them to move to the master status. So if you can think of psychology as a kind of guild, supervision is the process by which people move through the guild.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then we also use sometimes the term mentorship, especially in US to my experience. Is there any difference, you think, or we can use it as a synonyms?
I think that you said it was in the US, and mentorship is used a lot it is used exclusively, well, not exclusively, but it's used mainly by the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. They do not call what they do when what we would call supervision. They call it mentorship. The issue with the AASP is that supervision, especially in higher education and in other jurisdictions, has legal responsibilities. Like in a university, when I supervise a student, if that student screws up big time or hurts or damages a client in some way by their actions or inactions, then I'm actually legally responsible. And then also my department is legally responsible, and the university is legally responsible. Mm-hmm. And so I think what ASP was trying to do by using mentorship was to remove any chance of that sort of interpretation of what they were doing, protected move. And when you look at ASP's definition of mentorship, it actually is so broad that it could include any kind of educational type of activity between, you know, a professor and a student, or an accomplished senior practitioner and a new baby doc or something. So I don't think it's particularly helpful. The rest of the world uses supervision, and I know Europe uses the term intervision, and well, and a lot of the world use pure supervision. I don't see intervision as any different than other types of supervision. It's a peer supervision, or it could be a group supervision. The goals are the same.
Mhm.
The goals are to grow and to meet with peers and learn from others, and get feedback on one's own practice. Because we all have blind spots, and if you have group supervision, peer supervision, you get other viewpoints and other sorts of ways of looking at things that can help us with our blind spots, because by definition, we're blind.
Okay, and do you think that we should actually stay in supervision and not in supervision for the lifelong career time, or we might need to switch at some point? I mean, with age, it might be obvious that at some point I am old enough to not have too many who are much older than me and much more experienced than me.
And then it becomes collegial peer supervision, and that's like this. That's like a bunch of, in the guild system, that's like a bunch of masters in the guild getting together for, you know, a talk about what their projects are, you know, and that. But it's still resourcing others who have similar but also different knowledge. And one of the things that I see usually, but really possible in supervision, is that you can add things to your repertoire as you go. For example, in the beginning supervision, a student has been primarily, say, trained in CBT, psychological skills training or something, and the supervision is very much in that mode. But as people gain experience, like I have supervisees who come to me who've been trained in CBT, psychological skills training, but they're really interested in a really different sort of viewpoint. And they come and we start something like psychodynamic supervision, which is something that doesn't happen much at all in any sports psychology supervision. But it's a way to conduct supervision that expands how one can conceptualize, case formulate, examine self in the process. And so you can use supervision as a way to increase your knowledge and increase, you know, your understanding of therapeutic processes. And so supervision is essentially continuing professional development. And here in Australia, we are legally required. We can actually get deregistered if we don't do it. We are legally required to have a minimal of at least about once a month supervision of our practice. And we have to document it. And if you're audited, you have to have the documentation there that you have been supervised for, you know, about once a month. So in some places around the world, you have to have supervision or you can't practice.
Okay, so it's not an option in some countries.
It's not an option. It's not something we can opt out of.
Yeah.
Legally or ethically, and I think that's good. That is not true for probably the majority of the countries in the world. Although I don't know. I haven't looked at a whole bunch of different ethics codes, but because sports psychology often came out of kinesiology departments and exercise science departments, but here in Australia, all the training in sports psychology is done in psychology departments.
Mhm.
And so we have to be guided by the Psychology Board of Australia and our code of ethics of the Australian Psychological Society. So we are bound by that.
All right. You partially already said something about this. My second W. So it's why. Why is it important for the applied practice? What are the benefits of having supervision for the practitioner himself, herself, and also for the client? And if there are some risks of not having supervision. So let's say the last one is I'm experienced enough. I'm not the newcomer in the field anymore. Is there any risk if I stop having supervision? So the why in general first.
Okay, we'll start with that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are risks in not having supervision, even for a well-practiced, experienced psychologist, and because clients are going to come along that you're maybe not quite sure what to do with them or where they're going, or you're having there's a complex case presentation and you're having difficulty trying to figure out exactly what is going on, and everybody at some point, every practitioner I know, I still do, I get stuck with my clients. I'm stuck. I'm sitting here. I don't know what the fuck to do now, and so that um, so that if you have a supervisor, then you have a place to go when you feel that I need some help here. If even as an experienced practitioner, you never need help and you think you know everything, then I'm a little worried about you
Then I
because we don't.
definitely need the help.
Yeah. Then I'm really worried about you. It's, I want my supervisees to doubt themselves. I don't want them to be paralyzed by doubt, but I want them to doubt. I want them to question, and I want my peers, when I supervise a peer or when one of my peers supervises me, they'll help me doubt the way that in which I am thinking about the client and maybe offer something that I hadn't even thought of. And I've been doing this for decades, and I still, as I say, I still get stuck with clients. I still don't know quite what is happening between me and the client, and I need some help. And so, yeah, I think there's lots of risks of not having it. In that, one, you don't have a net, and you want to always operate with a net, because with some clients we're on a high wire. This client is suicidal. You want to have a net in case something happens that you don't know how to proceed. And so I think there's like that's sort of the risk for the client. If you don't have supervision on their complex case, you may be advising them to do something or try something that they shouldn't be doing.
And so actually without supervision, I am much more blindfolded
Yes,
in the
or
process.
blinkered, maybe.
Yeah,
Blinkered might
yeah,
be another word for that.
maybe better one. Okay, so let's say that it's clear to me why to have it for me, for my own safeguarding, maybe I would say, like a net,
Yes.
peer net. And also it's obvious for the client, not talking about the fact that it's all, of course, according to our ethical codes of conduct, not only in psychology, but also in sport psychology, because they are pretty the same. Whether the specialists are coming from the field of sport science or from psychology, they still share the same ethics code of conduct.
Yes. Yes.
So then I
And
asked,
oh no, I was just going to say, because I have plenty of supervisees, and a lot earlier in my career, I would tell my client, I don't know about whatever it is that we're talking about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and talk to my supervisor about this and get some guidance on where you and I can go with this, because I'm really not sure. And that, I think that helps the client say that, yeah, my practitioner isn't, a super expert and a god here. He's human and he doesn't know things. That is probably very helpful for a client to know. And he's going to go get help for both of us in this situation. So I think that's the other benefit to the client. The client knows, one, that I'm getting supervised by somebody who is senior to me or somebody who has more knowledge than I do. And so that may help the client feel even more secure with the psychologist.
Okay. So let's continue then with the when. When do you think one should look for supervision? And is there any time when one can stop being supervised?
No, I think we established the answer to the second one there. Is
Yes.
that, it's either, you stop when you stop practice, or you stop when you're dead. And in when supervision comes in well, sometimes it comes in undergraduate education, but it definitely comes into when people are in master's degrees for sports psychology or doctoral degrees for sports psychology, and they are seeing clients or working with coaches and athletes and teams and things like that. And as soon as that work starts, that's when supervision starts. It should start immediately, right then. And in most cases, the supervisors will be supplied by the tertiary educational institution. Some people, though, have maybe gone down another route, down the clinical psychology route, and they are a couple years into their practice of regular clinical psychology, but then they want to expand into sports psychology. And to do that, then they should probably seek another supervisor who has expertise in working with sport to supervise their work with athletes and teams and things like that. So supervision starts when you start talking to people in practice, and or you shift supervision when you shift to a different sort of field and get a new supervisor in a new type of helping profession.
Mm-hmm. That also comes up with the next question, which well builds up. It's who. And what you mentioned, I just can say, share with the attendees here that we have also some requirements for someone being a supervisor for our specialists in applied sports psychology. And here we were not too strict. We were not talking that it must be a sports psychologist, because especially in some countries, there are not so many sports psychologists.
Yep.
And the field is not that developed, but we defined it that the person should be a practicing psychologist or sports psychologist, obviously, with some recent experience in applied practice. So not like I worked applied 30 years ago, but I did at least 50 cases in the last 8 years. So not necessarily a full applied practice, because in many countries, again, especially if we talk about sports psychologists, they are often hired in academia and lecturing at the same time. So they might not have so much space to work applied anymore, but yet 50 cases in 8 years, it's not that much. And our second requirement, that they themselves are supervised. Because we believe, as you said, it's a career-long, not lifelong necessarily, career-long process that should be in place. But from your experience, who do you think can be a supervisor? If are there any qualities a supervisor should have? Maybe we should develop ourselves as potential supervisors in the future.
Well, for both these questions, I think there are already systems in place that in some countries and in some international organizations and national organizations that actually set out the guidelines for becoming a supervisor. Here in Australia, with the Psychology Board of Australia, you have to have at least 2 to 5 years post your final degree, and then you have to go through formal supervision training, even if you had it. Even if you had some supervision training in your doctoral degree, you have to go through their board-approved supervision training system, which is like 3 or 4 days of a lot of work that includes online stuff, role plays, evaluations, written stuff, case formulation, etc. And it costs you about 1,400 or 1,500 Aussie dollars to do. So, and then every 5 years after that, you have to go back and have a full day supervision refresher course. So you, if you go to the Psychology Board of Australia website, and you can click on a little button that says search for supervisors, and you will find the different supervisors who can supervise in whatever areas. Like mine says supervisor for clinical psychology and sports psychology. So so if a sports psychologist or a clinical psychologist wants to find me, that's where I am. As for the and ISSP actually has a registrar of psychology, and then AASP has a whole registrar of mentors, which is essentially supervisors. So and in these days of telehealth, and personally, a lot of supervision can be done, around the world, and so that you can look for a supervisor in loads of different countries. And as for the quality of the supervisor, I think that is probably the simplest answer to that one is those are the qualities that you would want in a psychotherapist. Those are the, just go back to Rogers, and there's the qualities that you want: genuineness, unconditional positive regard, authenticity, being present, all of those qualities that Rogers wrote about for being an effective psychologist. I think those are the same for supervisors, although there is one difference in that unconditional positive regard, because supervisors also have evaluative power over supervisees. That's the gatekeeping part. So that makes it a little different than there's a little slight difference between supervision. Well, there's a big difference between supervision and psychotherapy. And that we could talk about that for a long time.
Yeah, obviously, as a supervisee, I need to trust my supervisor as much as I need to trust my psychotherapist as a client, because otherwise I would not share when I am in my lows. And actually, those are the points that should be supervised, not when I am happy and successful with the client, but especially when I am in big doubt. And maybe even if I feel like I failed, yes. Which means, yeah, it is important. And also, I think the evaluative part, I think it's important that the supervisor is ready to tell me this is wrong what you did. And that's maybe not something I want to hear from my psychotherapist in such a direct way, but from the supervisor, it's definitely needed to hear it in case it is a case, obviously. All right, let's continue with the how then. So we finished the W questions, and let's start with the H question. So I know that this can be super wide question, but you already answered how to look for a supervisor, I would say. So I would like to ask, how does the process look like? And I know that it can look like differently depending on the background of the supervisor, but maybe just a slight shortcut. Short.
Well, I guess the process often begins with a telephone call or an email or some type of communication in which the supervisee contacts the potential supervisor and asks if they're available for supervision and what, maybe there's a brief conversation about what supervision might be about or what they're looking for. And I think it's very much, it has a lot of similarities, and then they agree to meet and talk further, because supervision, like psychotherapy, can be a relatively long-term intimate relationship. And that's a lot of investment by the supervisee, and it's a lot of investment by the supervisor. And so there needs to be some sort of ground rules or some sort of plan and some sort of agreements about what we're going to be doing in supervision. We want to look to see, it's just like in meeting a psychotherapy client. Sometimes your psychotherapy client is not a match with the psychologist, because the psychotherapy client has these certain problems or these certain difficulties, and the psychotherapist is maybe a CBT person, and this client has had a not so good experience with a CBT person, so they're not a match. And so that you can kind of think of that intake that you have with a client. There's a supervision intake also. When you sit down and say, what are we going to do together? Let's get to know each other. Here's the models that I work through. What have you experienced in your previous supervision? What would you like? And sort of getting to know each other, because we have to figure out if we're a potential match. And after that, the process may be whatever we agree on. Sometimes the process, say, like in psychoanalytic, psychodynamic supervision, the processes that what we are really looking at in depth is the transference, countertransference configuration between the client and the supervisee, and also the transference, countertransference configuration between the supervisee and me. And so that's a very different type of supervision than, say, classic CBT supervision, or working in supervising people who are teaching psychological skills. So what the process looks like is going to be determined by what model you're using.
Yeah, so kind of on the working philosophy as well of the supervisor.
Yes.
And supervisee.
Exactly. And sometimes those in the beginning, like I said earlier, in the beginning in supervision, like I would not put psychodynamic supervision onto a beginning sports psychology. That would be wrong, because a beginning psychologist needs a lot more support, skills development, even more further education and reading and practice and role plays and things like that are more advanced psychologists doesn't need that sort of attention. They need a different level of, as we go from apprentice to journeyman to master.
Yeah. Okay. I will ask last question, which will be how much of supervision is enough. But before you answer that, I would like to talk now to our attendees. So please look for the icon of Q&A on the panel, and you can still ask the questions. So far, nothing, but I will figure out some. I still have some in mind. But this is for the attendees. If you would like to ask Mark something, please feel free to write it to the Q&A, and we will go back to it shortly. And now my last question. So how much of supervision is enough? How do I know if I have enough or maybe too much? Can there be too much supervision?
That's a good question. And I'm not sure. I'm a little stumped on that one. It would probably be pretty hard to have too much supervision. Supervision. There are limits to supervision, because supervision also costs. So And in general, like when we're training people at the Institute for Social Neuroscience to become clinical and sport and exercise psychologists, when they first start out, there is one supervision hour for every 7 hours of practice. But by the time they finish their degree, it's one supervision session for every 16 hours of practice. So, and when you think of the requirement here in Australia of one supervision hour for every month of practice, that's a lot of practice. I think it's to know if you're having enough supervision. Yeah, I guess you sort of have to measure and do an evaluation of yourself. Am I feeling that I am have enough resources and knowledge to work with these cases in a competent way? So you have to make a brutal self-assessment. And if you say, well, I'm a little weak in this area, well, then maybe you need more supervision in that area. But I think our requirement here in Australia, about once a month, is pretty minimal.
Okay. You said like 1 to 7, so I can imagine as a novice practitioner, I have it more or less on a weekly basis, and then slowly I have it a bi-weekly or 3 weekly, and at the end a monthly maybe. Plus, I still can have my peer supervision on the top.
Yeah, and you have your one-on-one supervision, and then I'm a big fan of peer supervision. I'm a big fan of group supervision. I think those are all, even in group supervision, if you don't even report a case in group supervision, you're still learning about all these other people's experiences and their models and how things are going. So I think all of those are great ways to get supervision.
Yeah, and also this is just a remark for our specialists in applied sports psychology. We perceive, as I already mentioned, supervision as a career-long process which should be involved, and we also ask it for the recertification. So not only for the first getting the SASP certification, but then also for the recertification. And for the recertification, we ask for 40 hours during 4 years, out of which 20 should be supervision. So I would say for the supervision, half of what is legally set in Australia, but definitely at least intervision. All right, so we have here first question. I'm not sure if you can see it as well, Mark, in the Q&A button, but I read it loud anyway. Hello, my name is Stan Kasongo Katabua. My question is related to sports psychometric assessment. Which one do Dr. Andersen use, if any? So do you use any sport psychometric assessment, or did you use?
The one, about the only one I use is the one Peter Gibbs, my doctoral student, and I, and Darren Marchant, and that's the athlete apperception technique. And Stan, if you can get my email, you give my email to.
I can type it. I can type it privately. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can send you. I can actually send you a copy of the manual for that if you would like. It's got both interpretations for primarily sports psychologists, but it also has psychodynamic interpretations for clinical psychologists. So, but I'm happy to send the article that was published about its development and the manual in the next day or so, once Michaela. Happy to do that.
Yeah, I will send the email to him, and in the private answer, should it be the Gmail or the Halmstad University one?
Use the Gmail. That would be
all right. So it's sent, and he can approach you for the next one. And there was also,
I see, from Katarina.
okay, yeah, from Katarina. Thank you very much for all the information related to supervision, Mark. We appreciate it. Which psychological approach do you find the most useful in your practice and why?
Well, I'm probably going to be a disappointment here because I don't do sports psychology. I haven't for a long time. I've trained a lot of people to become sports psychologists, but my clinical practice is where what I do, and a couple of my clients may be athletes, but they're coming to me for clinical types of issues. I often give my clients a choice as to what they might want in terms of therapy, because I don't know what sort of therapy is going to help them. And then generally I offer them a psychodynamic approach, and then I offer them a mindfulness-based kind of approach with a lot of meditation and present focus and self-regulation types of things. And then I offer them a primarily cognitive approach, which is very similar to, say, Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy. So we really examine, so they can have an archaeological psychodynamic approach, a present focus approach, and then a cognitive approach where I'm their devil's advocate and we're really examining how they think. I give that to my clients because I don't know when I first meet them, and I don't know what's going to work for them and what they might feel, and then they choose one or two of those. And so those are the sort of three areas in which I work.
All right, we have a next question from Renata Baric from Croatia. And the question is whether there is a line between supervision and psychotherapy. Oh, I know your answer actually for this. So is there a line?
There is a line, but in some types of supervision, the line between supervision and psychotherapy begins to get blurry. And especially in the two major types of supervision that really blur things at times is, of course, psychodynamic supervision, because we're examining the supervisee's own history of, say, trauma and anxiety and whatever, and how. But what we try to do in supervision, in a, say, a psychotherapeutic type of supervision, like psychoanalytic supervision or existential humanistic supervision, is when the supervisee's personal stuff is coming into supervision. What we try to do is, remember, we're going to look at your anxiety, say, but we're going to look at your anxiety as to how it may influence, for good or for ill, your work with the client. So we say, you know, you have a substantial death anxiety. So what happens to you when you're working with a client who maybe has a parent who is dying? What happens to you, and how does that, your death anxiety, how might it influence? How might it make you more empathetic, or how might it make you more identifying and with your client? So when the psychotherapy material, or material that could be taken to psychotherapy for the supervisee, comes up, we say, okay, we're looking at this, but we're looking at it in relation to you and your client. The roots of that, its origins, the original traumas or whatever, that's for your psychotherapy. But how you're reacting because of all that with your client, that's for supervision. And we hope supervision is not therapeutic, but we hope that supervision is not therapy, but we hope that it is therapeutic.
That was exactly the answer I expected from you, because we discussed this a lot, cases. So the advice is that it is good if I have a psychotherapeutic background, so I can have good sensors for these issues. But in general, as a supervisor, I would just point it out and said to my supervisor that maybe this is something he or she should pursue within a psychotherapeutic relationship. we can look at it, however, from the professional point of view and how it influenced the client. Good. Next question from Samia from Lebanon. Is remote supervision possible for sports psychology practice, particularly in contexts like Lebanon, where local supervising is lacking? If so, how does it work across international borders, and where to find such programs supervisors?
Well, that is definitely a possibility. For example, Michaela here is my supervisee and has been for many years, and we do it across international borders, and it works just fine. Now it's finding, sports psychology supervisors, and that is to go through the different sorts of international organizations, networks, the different registration. ISSP has a registration of supervisors, and then you can look up and and study them and see if they're doing things. I imagine there's descriptions of what they do, and you can also, any type of word of mouth, if you know any other professionals in other countries and they say, yes, I get supervised by so and so. I mean, I do supervision. I'm here in Tasmania, but I also do supervision with other Australians who are in Melbourne. And so it's with all these platforms that we have with Zoom and Skype and things like that, it's really quite possible. Usually what I in terms of payment for that, I ask my supervisees, what are you paid when you see a client for an hour? And then whatever they're paid for seeing a client for an hour, then I say, well, that's the price of supervision. And in some countries that's not very much money, and I'm fine with that. And in other countries, it's a fair amount of money, and I'm really fine with that. So
okay,
that's definitely a possibility. There's a second part to this.
Yeah, there's a second part. I obtained my master's degree in UK 2017 and have since been working in sport for development. Can I still pursue professional practice and supervision now, or do I need to enroll in another graduate or postgraduate program first?
I guess I'm thinking maybe it's a bit unclear in working in sport development. Anybody can get supervision. A teacher in a high school can, go back to one of their old professors and ask for supervision. Supervision, it's an arrangement between two people. So it doesn't necessarily have to go through any graduate programs, but if you're wanting to be supervised for a registration or a certification or something like that, then you need to go through whatever certification you're trying to get, or registration or licensure. So yeah.
Okay. Next question is from Peiling Kuo, and I will just say that we will use another 7 minutes. Maybe the question from Isma actually will be answered live within the SASP part of this interview, but let's continue. Hello, Dr. Andersen. What is the disadvantage of having a psychology background or a sports science background to be a sports psychologist/supervisor? Or actually, it doesn't make it does make any difference from your experience? So does it make, or it doesn't?
There are plenty. There's so many different pathways to working in the psychology realm within sport. And definitely in North America, those pathways have been predominantly through sports sciences. And those programs have produced plenty of really excellent practitioners who have made good livings and are well respected. And they're not psychologists, but they have the certified mental performance consultant certification from ASP or something like that. I think the pathway of becoming a psychologist probably makes it a bit easier, because there's all these different licensure and supervision requirements and things like that. So that is just part of the process. Once you're out of a sports exercise science department and practicing in the psychological realm of performance enhancement, psychological skills, and things like that, or team cohesion or whatever it is, and you're not you don't have to be a certified mental performance consultant. You can be a consultant or a counselor. That those words are not protected. But then there's also no requirements for you to be supervised in that sense. So it's gonna kind of depend on where you are and what's happening in your country in sports psychology, because it is, as I say, it is different for different countries. In Australia, you can't practice unless you are a psychologist.
Yeah, I agree. And plus, maybe another thing can be that if the sports psychology has a strong background, whether it is in psychology or in sports science, then in the sports science, it's going to be a really strong background, like in US. So you will be actually taught the skills that the psychologists in other countries are taught, like how to run the consultation, for example, how to build up the rapport and so on. However, unless there is this sports psychology background in the sports science, then in those countries, those skills are definitely, from my experience, not taught. You are taught just the theory of sport and theory of running a training. And then this can be an issue for a future career in sport psychology consultancy. Now I will skip Isma's question because we have only 3 more minutes, and Isma is one of our certified specialists, so we will answer that question later in the SASP section. From a question from Nicolette Tanes. Barg, really nice to hear about the psychodynamic approach in supervision. What about working with athletes using the same vision, of course, combined with, for example, CBT? So psychodynamic vision in working with athletes.
Yeah, well, actually, in my career, when I have worked, at the time when I did a lot of work with athletes, I did have some athletes who were really quite interested in trying to figure out their lives. They weren't that interested in trying to, do performance enhancement, but they were really trying to understand their lives and their dysregulations around certain things, their relationships with their parents, and were fraught. And I've had quite a few athlete clients who, when we went down a psychodynamic path and went back into into childhood, into relationships with parents and early childhood trauma and things like that. But that wasn't that wasn't directed at performance enhancement, and it definitely wasn't CBT. And so it's an approach that is not for everybody, obviously, but that it some of my former athlete clients, that was why they came to me, was to try to figure out how do they get here, 25 years later, why am I like this? And so that it's a type of therapy that is not written about much in sports psychology, but I've got a few published papers on it. But so I hope that answers your question.
Okay, the next question is from Anthony. Mark, do you propose lessons or training directly in Tasmania?
You mean, do I?
Can you suggest some? Maybe if you can suggest some lessons or training, I guess, in sports psychology or in supervision in Tasmania.
Well, there's no sports psychology training in Tasmania. We do have training in supervision, and that goes through different organizations that are approved of by, and they're online too. There's a lot online that are approved by the Psychology Board of Australia, and you can take those. You can do that training probably from anywhere in the world if you're willing to pay the money for it. But the 2 training centers in sports psychology in Australia, there are only two. One is the Institute for Social Neuroscience, and that's in Melbourne, and the other is the University of Queensland, and that's in Brisbane. And those are the only two institutions where you can get training to become a registered sports psychologist. And sport and exercise psychology is a legally protected title in Australia, but that involves at least a master. You have to have a master's degree to be able to call yourself a sports psychologist in Australia.
Okay, and I will take the last question from Maria. Hello, can you please recommend supervision in Europe in sports psychology with a background of psychodynamic informed practice? I have plenty of supervision for my clinical cases, but in sports psych at the moment, I only have supervision mostly with CBT trained psychologists.
Yeah, that's Maria, that's going to be a difficult one because there are not many people even in Europe, much less the United States or even here in Australia in sports psych, who have psychodynamic backgrounds. And I unfortunately I can think of a couple of my former students who got psychodynamic backgrounds from the course we ran that here in Australia that might be able to get supervision from them in sport areas. But Michaela, do you know of anybody?
Not really, actually, but I think Maria, you don't need a person, I mean the psychodynamic person who is working as sports psychologist to have that person as your supervisor of sports psychology. I mean, of course, we can say that it's different and added value and so on, but as long as you have the match with the supervisor and he or she is willing to supervise your sports psychology practice, meaning like the main difference or one of the main differences, I would say, is that for a psychodynamic person, it can be very difficult to imagine that you do your work outside of your safe room.
Yes.
I mean, that would be the main, outside of the couch, as one would maybe say even more for the like really psychodynamic approach. So, but the rest stays the same. And so if you would like to look with the lenses of the psychodynamic approach, I think you just look for a psychodynamic psychotherapist who is also doing supervision. And that person, I think, would fit well for your cases. Yeah. Okay, good. I would say that we finish here because we already prolonged it quite a lot. And now I would like to, first of all, thank you to Mark for giving us his valuable time. We really appreciate it. I would like to thank you with a picture of our president, Maurizio Bertolo, who knows Mark very well.
Yes.
And in case you are our FEPSAC member, the individual members have access or will have access to the recording in the membership area of our website. And in case you are not a member and would like to become a member, everything is, all the information is available on the www.fepsac.com. And we would like to thank you very much. And I would like to ask our specialists in applied sports psychology to stay. I hope I promoted everybody as a panelist now, but unless I didn't, please raise your hand. And to the rest, I wish you a wonderful day. Thank you for your attention. Bye.
And thanks so much.